What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. I know if you've been listening to this podcast, you hear me say it every single time. So if you already are subscribed, tell a friend. As always, the J. David Group, which is my podcast, my company, is sponsoring this podcast. My company helps high-growth software companies recruit top software sales leaders and salespeople. So go to the jdavidgroup.com/hiring to learn more, or go to the jdavidgroup.com/looking if you're looking for your next big challenge. Now, my guest today is Chip Scully. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Vault, which provides the most comprehensive software platform in the market to address the financial burden of student loan debt, which is a big problem. Chip, welcome to Over Quota.
Thank you, Jay. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just start with what I just ended with. Tell me a little bit about Vault and your role there as the CRO.
Well, Vault's been in the market since 2013, so we were probably a little bit ahead of our time. I only joined about 15 months ago. Thankfully for us, we did a couple things before I even got there that sort of fortified what would otherwise have been probably a pretty long wait before we got to a market where there's a lot of employer adoption. Employer adoption for student loan assistance benefits is still pretty low. We're still in the nascent days. Just yesterday, there was an article on CNBC.com about Google wanting to get into that space for their employees as a way to address many things, but among them, all of the benefits that an employee who might be able to show up to work won't be able to get in the times we're living in. And so maybe they can offset some of those things with a student loan assistance benefit. So we aligned ourselves with big financial partners who are in many cases also strategic investors like Prudential and John Hancock and CUNA Mutual. And so my role as Chief Revenue Officer, I came on board in July of 2019. And, I lead the partnership development. We also have a direct sales component for those employers who don't go through one of our partners, and some account management responsibilities, and just generally strategy about how we want to go to market and sort of continue to evolve as a company.
Tell me a little bit about your decision to join Vault. You alluded to the fact that they were already in a pretty good marketplace, I would imagine, or in a position. I would imagine that's certainly led to you making a decision. But tell me a little bit more about that. What were some of the core elements that you saw there?
Well, I think what I've tried to do with my career is I tried to align my career with innovation. It took me a little while to get there. I was in businesses that were getting disrupted, and it occurred to me finally, it would be a lot better if you were doing the disrupting than getting disrupted. So easier said than done. It took a few years to transition for sure. But I now seek places that are innovative, that can have a big impact, and I can have a big impact. And in this case, impact sort of means two things. One is, Vault can have a huge social impact on this student loan debt crisis, and I can have a big impact on Vault and our business.
You mentioned it took a while to transition, so to speak, into more organizations that were disruptive as opposed to being disrupted. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that as your career to that point, you were working with and for larger brand, sort of, I'll say even slower moving types organizations, and then having to make that transition was tough because people were looking at you as that guy that was coming from those large companies and weren't necessarily going to be able to assimilate into a smaller, more nimble culture? Or you're saying from your perspective, you had your own sort of challenges and hangups as far as how to actually, I guess, convince yourself that it's time to make that move?
Oh, not so much the latter. I think fundamentally when you're, maybe an example would be appropriate. I mean, one of the best positions I loved was at Fortune magazine. We were magazine of the year at the turn of the century, and it was a great group of colleagues, and we had a fabulous time. And then very sharply, 2001 hit. And as just one example, my two largest clients went out of business, WorldCom and Accenture. That's tough. That's getting disrupted. Well, and then there were just, there was other media things that were coming, on the forefront at that point, right? And so, ad pages dropped precipitously. And so you sort of look around, you say, all right, I'm not really as in control of my environment as I would like to be. You can, to a large extent, you can sort of control your win rate. But if you don't have opportunities, or those opportunities get taken away, then you're in a compromised position. And so I wanted to go to a place where I thought, well, if I could shift my career to an innovative place, an innovative industry that was growing instead of shrinking, I could not only be a part of growth, but I had enough confidence in myself to say, I think wherever I am, I'm going to have a strong win rate. And if I'm also in an innovative place, then I have a much better opportunity to control my own success.
And then what were the headwinds as you were making that transition that you experienced? You said it took you several years to get there.
Well, I sort of did it bit by bit. We're now talking about it at a time, that was about 18, 19 years ago. So SaaS software was not, it existed, but it's not where it is now.
Right.
So I'm in an environment now that, fintech, for all intents and purposes, did not exist. So I made incremental steps along the way to get me to this place. And I've continued to evolve. So there was no one big jump, but I would say each of my career choices incrementally evolved me and as a professional, and allowed me the opportunity to grow, and not just to switch brands from one competitor to another. I don't think I really did that in my career. I really looked to sort of grow with each step.
Speaking of growing with each step, when you first come on board, whether it's Vault or some of the other companies that you joined, is there a particular playbook that you take with you, so to speak? And you don't have to, get all proprietary on me, but is there a particular playbook that you take, or a set of action items that when you come in, like, here's what I want to do first, here's what I want to do second, here's what I want to do third, and then execute on all those at a certain point? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I think you can have a playbook, but I find that then you get into the job and you realize it may or may not apply. And so I think you have to bring a way of thinking that, my predecessors at Vault weren't the founders either. And so like any company, you come in and you inherit certain things. And, that is probably an acceptable way to go about business. And I think you have to question those things and just say, is this the right way? Are we the most, don't be afraid to rip up the script and say, I think we would be better off going this way. And just trust yourself enough to know that if you present the case effectively and socialize it appropriately within the company, you can make dramatic changes, and you don't have to accept the way things are done to have to make a real big impact. And also know that people are relying on you to do so. If they wanted the status quo, you wouldn't have been hired.
How much time do you give yourself, or how much time do they give you, I guess, to, look at the business and figure that out? And then even more, how do you go about assessing the team members that you have versus the go-to-market strategy, the business model, and separate the two and say, we've either got the right players in the wrong model, or the wrong players with the right model, or a combination of the two?
Right. Well, on the time question, I would say, I think you have to prove yourself every day and every week. I think that there's, especially this year, we've seen dramatic changes that I think we had to make changes like everyone else. And we had to win the battles that were up for winning, and we have. And so the outcome might not be quite what we wanted, but in some ways, we've won battles that we didn't even know we were actually going to be participating in. So the time thing is a funny thing, because I think, you can mark a time and an expectation, but I think the reality is, if you're proving yourself every day and every week, through any number of ways, whether it's making an actual sale or making a connection, or making meaningful change in the business, hopefully all of the above, then things become pliable. And then just as far as assessing the team, you got to run down a bunch of tracks at the same time. You've got to think about what's the best way to go to market and look at your people. And so we've made a lot of adjustments with our people involved. But one of the things we're in the process of doing right now is sort of realigning. And one of the reasons why we did it is we thought our customers would be better served by sort of realigning resources, where one person is probably going to wear a lot of hats, where we had sort of all these various roles segmented between people, and we thought that we had too many touch points at partners. That partners really wanted one single contact that they could rely on. And the reality is our people wanted to grow into those roles, and they came in with different skill sets. So they had gaps to fill, but they all wanted to grow in those roles that they didn't come from. So, all of your people aren't going to be the same, but when we talked through what the opportunity was and why we were doing it and what they wanted to do with their career, it jived. And so we're moving towards that right now.
A couple of follow-up questions there. You said proving yourself every day, right? And one example that you gave, of course, is making a sale. Another example that you gave is making meaningful impact on the business. As a chief revenue officer, because it's obviously by nature a strategic and visionary role in a lot of ways, and you're driving results through your either managers and other people. How is there a way where you could really look at your day at the end of the day and say, they can look at what I'm doing and they know that I made a meaningful impact on the business? Or is it longer tail than that, right? Because it is, it's like a flywheel as you push, right? And the more you push, the faster it grows. And how can you see that? And I'm just asking out of curiosity, sitting in your position, like, man, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
Yeah. Well, it is, but I also think that's what motivates me. So I think that there's a lot of ways, I could think of countless ways that we've made changes to the business that wasn't a signed contract, mm-hmm. but it really helped the company. And so two examples come to mind. Like we had contracts, which I think we just accepted that this was the way we had to do business, where our clients could terminate termination for convenience. They could terminate at any time. And so, I said, we don't really need to have this. We can have termination for cause, but not termination for convenience. And so we took that out of the contract. And as a result, we have a much more predictable, stable revenue stream going forward than we had in the past. And when you go into a pandemic, you're grateful you made those changes. So that was not a sale, but it certainly helps to grow the foundation for the company. Another little thing we did, so many little things, but they add up, is, we had a very unique selling proposition in the business, but I don't know that we were completely articulating it as best we could. And as just one thing that we did, what we did was we said, well, we sort of had this, well, this is what we do differently. And we explained it and we said, okay, do you understand that? Does that make sense? And, the client would always say, of course, yes, that's great. And sometimes you got more feedback than that. And so you'd have a recognition that aligns with their sensibilities and their ethos. But other times, you didn't, and you just assumed that made sense. And so what we started to do is say, just so you're aware, let us show you what exactly that means to your business. So, based on your company size and some other, forecasting factors, we're able to project exactly the impact of our position to you versus what we think our competitors do. And so it becomes a math equation. And now it's drawn out on a piece of paper, which they almost certainly weren't doing on their own. And I think to some extent, we kind of assumed that they were on the back of the napkin doing the math. Well, of course they weren't, right? So we did it for them. And once you show them, and then they say, oh, okay. And then you see the light bulb goes off and you realize, okay, that's having an impact. Another thing that we did, I remember I came in and I said, well, what are the case studies? What are the outcomes we can look to? And, we proudly showed employees really save a lot of money and they're able to pay down their debt faster when there's a student loan assistance benefit. I said, well, that's great, but the employees aren't writing the checks. So the employers are, or the partners are, meaning large financial institutions. So what are their outcomes? And we didn't have any. And partly because it's just hard. It takes a long time to get this through, collect the data, and then make an outcome.
Yeah.
And partly because we just hadn't fished enough to get that sort of champion inside of a business who might share that data with us, and then we could share it. Even if only anonymously, at least we could show outcomes. And as it turned out, we had tremendous outcomes. And we were very believable. And because of where most people could understand where they were coming from based on who our partners are. And I would tell you, I don't think anybody else in the marketplace can show outcomes like that. So we not only could then show outcomes, but we were the only ones in the market showing outcomes, and they were very believable. And so, that's another example where that unto itself is not a revenue, it's not a signed contract, but that's led to a lot of signed contracts. And I don't think anybody in the company doubts that.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. One of the other things that you mentioned is, had to make changes, obviously, during this time, right, during the pandemic. But you had mentioned that as it pertains to assessing the team, that you essentially consolidated responsibilities in one person as opposed to multiple people hitting the accounts and the partners at different angles. Did that, and you said that was something that the partners wanted. Two questions. How did that challenge manifest itself to the partners, right? Where you had multiple people, multiple touch points, right? Like what was the detriment, I guess, to the business or to the partners? And then also, were that change that you made, was that part of the changes that you were making as a result of the pandemic, or were these changes that you made before that, or you were going to be making anyways?
I think we saw the writing on the wall that this would probably be a good thing to align ourselves to have. We were having too many people on too many meetings, and then we'd have to have internal meetings about the meetings. And if you had a single person accountable for that, it actually improved accountability. It improved the partner knowing who they would go to. So it was less of a toll on their resources. Really, they didn't ask us for this, and we're still in motion on this. So I'm speaking as if it's happened, but it's in motion right now. So, but it also hit on so many different cylinders. It allows our people to grow. It allows us to think more strategically because one person can see sort of the entire partnership and what levers we can push and how to go about that and make more of a connection to the partner instead of sort of being scattered across doing one role across our whole portfolio of business. So I haven't seen a downside yet. Maybe there will be, and it's going to require certainly some coaching and evolving along the way, but it's been a good start of a transition so far.
How do you align goals or realign goals when you do that, right? When the scope of one's responsibility changes, either it gets more broad, frankly, it sounds like in this particular model. How do you align it so that, you're coaching the right behaviors for the right outcomes?
Yeah, I haven't crossed that bridge yet.
Sorry, okay.
That's okay. Right now we're nascent enough. We're in a funny space where we've got some outstanding partners, but employer adoption's low. So we focus on team goals. there will be a day in the not too distant future where I think we will have, individual partner goals, and we'll almost certainly align ourselves that way, but we're not there yet. So, but that's around the corner, and hopefully hopefully if the economy rebounds, it's a 2021 thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me then the difference between, because you currently, as you mentioned, have both models, right? Direct selling and through partners. And obviously you've managed both throughout your career. What are some of the differences in terms of behavior, traits, activity, those types of things that are really important to have effective sellers, either partner or direct?
Yeah, well, at least in our space, every space is different, but at least in our space, if you're going through the channel, you ultimately have to be very respectful to the channel partner. Our partners are tremendous, and so they rely on us to play within certain boundaries, and in return, I think when we respect those boundaries and we genuinely look at each of these opportunities together, that then they start to see our behavior, and then they adjust with us. I can come back to that in a second, and then direct. There's a different set of rules, and in a strange way, direct also has a channel because there's a lot of brokers in this space, and sometimes they are the channel, and sometimes direct means you're talking directly to the employer, but it can be different things, and so. I haven't seen an example yet where sort of breaking the rules and going rogue, and when you're probably not supposed to be, that has had a happy ending. It almost never does. I'd say I haven't seen it yet. So, but what I have seen is when you do, really value the partner, and we think about this every day. I had conversations about this very topic today. We had a couple things that we need to think through, and we had to think about what's our approach and what's the cadence in which we go about this, and do we need to inform certain people about this step that we're thinking about before we go to that person. It happens every day, and we always say, like, we need to take the right protocol and go down the right path and the right chain of command. But because of that, we've been rewarded, and we've gotten champions at the partners who I think are more willing than ever to work with us. I think partly because they see that respect of the boundaries, and we've gotten them being willing to share outcomes, and they're willing to do more with us. So that cadence and sensibility and good judgment has played in our favor.
When someone's selling into the partners, and you mentioned obviously you have to play nice, so to speak, in the sandbox, as you're evaluating your team or looking to hire other people, what are some of the behaviors or that you must see, or even traits, I guess, if you will, to say, okay, this person's going to be someone who will be successful in that role as opposed to somebody who's not?
Right. I would say, how good is their judgment? How coachable are they? I think coachability is really important. I've sort of learned that later in my career. Mark Roberge, former chief revenue officer at HubSpot, came at his job with a really unique perspective with an engineer background, but he made sort of a lot of soft, unmeasurable sensibilities about sales and turned them into measurable things. And I thought his book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, is a great book. Highly recommend it. And there's a component in there about interviewing for coachability. I mean, you can't say in an interview, as he says, hey, are you coachable? I mean, who's answered no? Nobody, right? So, but there are a lot of people who are uncoachable, and there's a way to sort of test that. It's maybe not foolproof. I can tell you, I once went forward with an interview when somebody didn't pass that test, and I regretted it. So, I stick to that test. And so there are ways that you can, look for people's judgment. You can think about how detailed are they. You can think about, I still have interviews today where I scratch my head after the fact because there's no thank you on an email. After, like, I'm thinking to myself, am I that old fashioned that people don't write email thank yous anymore? But, if you're not going to do that when you're interviewing for the job, that's probably pretty telling. So I think there are a lot of ways in telling signs along the process that you can see who's probably going to be the right person, who isn't.
Is there a difference between, you mentioned judgment and coachability? And you mentioned judgment first, almost as if the judgment needs to be even stronger with a partner sale as opposed to direct, and tell me more about that if that's the case. But are there other, if there are, great. If not, maybe they're the same, but are there other skills and traits that you look for people that are more direct and user focused? I think coachability is obviously across the board, of course, right? But
Sure. Although I don't hear that many people talking about it. I would say, judgment is really important in each of those, any kind of sale. When's the right time to send the message? Who do you send it to? What does that message, trying to get out? Is how well is it written? So I think that comes, that's a really important characteristic. I also think that, somebody who can show me that they've got an excellent win rate and why, the why part is at least as important as the win rate itself. Did you meet friction at some point on a deal that you won, and how did you turn that around? And so, those are some of the things I'm looking for.
Speaking of why did you end up hiring that person that failed the coachability test? What was it? Yeah, why? I guess.
In case that person is listening to this, I don't know how much I want to reveal, but I would just say that person is ultimately going to be very successful, and that they were probably just not the right person for the role I was hiring. That person is extremely bright. They just probably weren't ready. I think that they were used to being a very independent worker.
Got it.
So they ended up finding the right role.
Fantastic. Okay. Define or describe to me like how you are as a leader. Like, what's your leadership style? How do you motivate behavior and affect change?
I think I'm very direct and I'm authentic. So I'm not going to ask somebody to do something that I'm not going to do myself. I think people will think and know that I have their back as long as they're, I'm also a believer in being professional, be on time, show up, be prepared. And when I give them that courtesy, I think they usually return it. So if I see somebody, struggling with that, I'll speak to them pretty directly and indicate that, I think that there's an expectation. I think I'm following that expectation. I think other people in the company are following that expectation. And I've had that conversation many times. Sometimes it really works. I've seen it work, and other times it isn't going to work. So, but if you deal with it straight on, it's the best way to deal with it.
When it doesn't work, how do you adjust?
Well, ultimately, you just have to figure out what's the best thing for the company and for that individual. And usually, if there's that much of a disconnect, you find a way to reconcile it, and you just try to do it as the best you can to be, compassionate and thoughtful about, the best way to do it.
What, is there room for, you mentioned you're very direct, you address it head on, you're conducting yourself with a certain decorum, right, in the way that you go about your business, and you expect them to do the same. When you're talking about, let's say, activity or activity, productivity, straight numbers, is that essentially the same conversation, or does it get more tactical than that?
Oh, it could be much more tactical than that. It's just any opportunity to improve, right? If I see opportunities where I can give somebody feedback, I think I was a believer in feedback before, but as my career has grown, I think feedback, and I ask for feedback from my employees. Is there anything I could be doing differently or better to help you? So, I assume that if we're all in this together, that we would all want to do that, right?
Mhm.
So any opportunity, it's not just about how many sales calls did you make or emails that went out, or it's, did you handle a certain situation the best you could? Was that the right message to send up to the right person? So it's really anything.
When someone is struggling, or just reps in general, I suppose, I mean, is there a particular commonality, something that's true that you've seen over the years that said, these, if reps don't do X, they're going to suffer continuously?
Um, well, I mean, I think fundamentally it's like how how passionate are they about the opportunity? How driven are they? I mean, I think probably if there's a consistency, it might be just internal drive, right? I mean, I think we talked about certainly coachability and judgment, and all those are really important, but and you need all those things, but we haven't really talked about drive. But I would say if there's a one consistent underlying thing with people who struggle, it is probably their drive. I think if you have a drive, you're coachable, and you have good judgment, you're going to be most of the way there.
Tell me about this. Tell me about how you improve, right? How do you get better when you're, essentially you can't turn to anybody and ask necessarily for help in making a strategic decision. Well, I'm assuming with the CEO and so forth at the executive leadership level, but how are you finding improvement? How are you improving, and who are your mentors at this point?
Well, I think I'm always looking outside. Well, first, I learn from everyone on my team or everybody in the company, and I believe in that. We have strategy sessions, often pre and post, not every time for every meeting, but we do a lot of them. I read outside. I read a lot of business books, and not exclusively business books, but I do usually like a good business book. Never Split the Difference. I read that recently, and we sort of took that. That was another great book, and we kind of took that was a former hostage negotiator who sort of turned that into like sales tools, and it was great storytelling and great sales tools, and I essentially from that book built a negotiation document that, and I asked a couple team members, and it was completely voluntary. I said, if you're interested, what I'm thinking about is building like a bi-weekly strategy session. I would ask that anybody who's interested in joining, read the book. And every 2 weeks, we're going to huddle and we're going to talk about what's sort of pressing in the moment. And we don't always fill out the sheet because I sort of want it to keep it fresh, but we sometimes go through that sheet and we fill it out, and it's, sort of like, what do we know going into this meeting? And we fill out the document. And I've shared that document with a couple other people outside my business, and they said that they've found it really useful. I am a judge and mentor at Mass Challenge, which for those of you who don't know Mass Challenge, it's a great sort of incubation space for startups. And so I learned from that experience, and hopefully I'm helping there. So I look to a lot of different places to get it, but I think you get in just your own experience. But there's a lot of different places to go to find solutions and to find inspiration, and you just have to keep on looking.
That negotiation sheet that you meant, is that what, I'm sorry, is that what you call it? The sheet that you fill out? What do you call it that? And the document that you use that you shared with your team and that you shared elsewhere, what do you call that document?
I just call it like our own internal negotiation one sheet.
Okay.
And it was inspired by a book called Never Split the Difference.
It's hard to quantify the results of before that document and after that document, but can you speak anecdotally towards it? Like, what have you seen in terms of sales readiness and preparedness going into meetings and conversations and those types of things?
Yes, I can. Actually, it just happened to coincide with that whole beginning of that, which was only a couple months ago. And I think the book was a couple years old, so I may be late to the game in reading it. But we happened to incorporate that about the same time where a pretty substantial client was going to renew, but they wanted to add some subsidiaries and they wanted to pay less. And the person, our point of contact on that business, I think at first thought this is going to be really difficult for us to, convince them. And they were on an old pricing rate card, so the pricing already wasn't very favorable for us, and now they're looking for a steeper discount. And so we got together, and somebody from, sort of like that account manager, myself, and a third person who had related experience, but not specific to that particular client, all got together and we went through it. And by the end, we had mastered exactly what our talk track was, exactly what our backup was, and how we would navigate that meeting. And I can tell you, and I guarantee you that the person who was the account manager on that business, and still is, and we're still trying to sign that deal, but we're close, would say that I think, first of all, just going through that process built confidence that we wouldn't have had we not gone through that. It just took a lot of detail and a lot of concentration, which I think, in other businesses I've been in the past may not have applied all of that to this effort. But we ended up, adding those subsidiaries, adding revenue, very fairly, mind you. We essentially honored the former rate that they were paying, and we explained why. And I can tell you that the decision maker on the call, and it really only took one call, said, "You guys have done so much work on this. He just sort of threw his hands up and said, fair is fair. Like you got me, and that's fine. You guys have done good work here, and so we got it done, and it was a big difference. So that worked out right away. We had our first good outcome on that fast.
Oh, you love when that happens, right? Because then it validates the decision to begin with to, put that together so that now there's more buy-in moving forward, right?
And it was fun. I think we all enjoyed it.
Very good. Okay. Let's go to what I'm calling now the rapid fire 5, which is just 5 questions that I ask you to sort of help me get to know you a little bit better, and the listeners get to know you a little bit better on slightly different angle, although it could be either business or personal. You ready?
You bet.
All right. So what are you most excited about right now, either personally or professionally?
Well, professionally, the student loan crisis is huge, right? 1.6 million or a trillion in debt. More people are delinquent on their student loans than auto loans, credit card loans, any kind of loans. And so it's becoming a national crisis. And so I think we're in as good or best position as anyone to solve for it. And so that's incredibly exciting. And we're constantly thinking through new ways we can do that. And it tests all of us, and from product to marketing to strategy, and we're all engaged in that. And so that's incredibly exciting. And it asks a lot of all of us. And I think we're all, putting a lot into that. So that's incredibly motivating. Personally, leading a completely different life. I used to sort of be more of a road warrior and on the road quite a bit. So I'm not on the road at all anymore. And that's been a blessing. I get to spend a lot more time with my wife and son, and that's been great. So, it's work. It's just different. Do I miss getting on a plane? I do. But, just different. There's certainly trade-offs, and spending more time with my family has been great.
Yeah, for sure. What have you learned about okay, well, this kind of goes to the next question. What have you learned about yourself since the pandemic has changed all of our lives?
What have I learned about myself? Well, I mean, I think I already knew most of these things, to be honest with you, but certainly, I'll tell you one of the things I really miss. I miss going to a great city like New York City. I had lived in New York City for over 20 years. We now live in Boston. Boston's a wonderful city, but, I love Boston. I love going to New York City and just seeing the energy of the streets, people dressed well, the sense of sort of anything is possible. I get from that city. And, I've drove through it once in the last 8 months, but that was it. So certainly I miss that and just general face-to-face human interactivity. But I get more time to work out. I get more time to So those things are good too. But that is one thing that certainly stands out. I mean, I only see my colleagues on Zoom because they are primarily, not entirely, but primarily in Austin, Texas. So I only see them on Zoom.
Interesting. One of the last two cities I visited before the shelter in place was New York City with my family. It was February. We were there from February 23rd, I think, to February 28th. So that was it was actually already there. We just weren't aware of it. And then I went to took a train home back to Boston, and then hopped on a plane immediately the next day to fly down to Miami for like the next week, and then came back like the very beginning of March. So yes, it's amazing. It seems like it was years ago, but it was just months. It was like literally just months ago. You already actually, so one of the questions, the third question is what keeps you motivated? You mentioned already making a meaningful impact. If you have anything else that motivates you, great. If not, we can go on to number 4.
Well, as far as what keeps me motivated, I'm pretty self-motivated. I would say my family keeps me motivated, both because of them and because I see, my wife and my son just, continue to awe me every day, doing great things. So I'm very proud of them. And they all, we work out. My wife and I work out every day. She's very driven for good health and working out. And, I used to be that way before I met her, but she took it to a whole nother level. And so I'm thankful for that. And it keeps me very motivated, and just being in good health and helps you have a clear head. And so I'm very, that keeps, I think that helps us keep all motivated.
Sounds like we're married to the same kind of woman, because my wife is the same way in terms of that goes. Yeah. And I always thought that I was, motivated and focused on my fitness. I'm actually, one question to ask you about that. Do you meditate at all?
I've tried it. Mm-hmm. Wasn't very good at it.
Okay.
I have tried to do sort of like micro doses of it, which I do actually find healthy. I'm not trying to belittle it. I don't think I have the bandwidth to try to do, it's not that I don't have the time. I don't think it's my ethos to do like 20 minutes, but I do little, like relax, close my eyes, just for a minute or two, and it helps. So that's about the extent of it though. Do you use an app or to do it, or do you just do it? Okay. No. Yeah. Okay, cool. I recommend Calm, by the way. Yes, I do it regularly, and it's made an impactful improvement for sure on my life, for sure. Can you share a piece of advice or a tool that you use to help you stay productive? Well, I should probably already hit on it, but I would say just keeping yourself educated, keep looking outward, especially now, right? I mean, I think you will always want to look to others and learn from others, but now more than ever, try to do it find a cadence or some mechanism that sort of makes you do it. Two things that just come off the top of my head actually is, one is I think I'm going to fill out today or in the next couple of days to go do a sort of a virtual education program from Harvard Business School that will take like 5 or 6 weeks later this year. So I'm going to do that. I saw somebody who I interviewed who I wanted to hire a couple of years ago, and for peculiar reasons I couldn't, mostly because of the visa challenges that we're having in this country. But that person moved up to Boston, and so I said, hey, let's get together. So I thought, that's the least I could do to reach out to somebody who's new to my city, and I call it my city, but I'm still getting used to Boston to some extent. And so, just trying to sort of keep it fresh and continue to reach out to people. So be outwardly focused. Absolutely. And the last question should be the easiest of all these questions. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you to say thank you for sharing, and perhaps maybe follow up with other questions that they might have? LinkedIn is fine. You can always try that. I don't mind messaging back and forth on that. I tend not to be a little picky about if I actually accept the invitation. I don't mind messaging, but I find that's a tricky tool, because then if you accept everyone, then it means nothing. So you got to strike the balance there. But here's an example of that very same person I said I interviewed a couple of years ago, and I'm going to get together with that person. now I'm connected to that person, and now we have we're set to meet next week. So yeah, with the right message and the right approach, I'm always happy to meet new people.
Well, I'm certainly happy that I met you, Chip, and that we've connected. For sure. This has been great. I'm sure people that are listening are getting a lot out of this. So thank you for going over quota.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate you reaching out. And I was a disc jockey at Bucknell University, and this sort of takes me back to those days. So I very much appreciate it.
There you go. If I could take you back anytime. Goodbye, everybody. I'm cueing the music.